So in this video, I wanted to briefly talk about the Parker 51, the Parker 21, and then some of the clones that exist on the market today. The Parker 51 is one of the classic fountain pens. It's maybe the most collectible of all fountain pens. It has a great history. It's a really nice pen. It has a number of notable features. It's just not only super collectible, but there are reasons why it's collectible. It's not just for nostalgia reasons. It's a very cool pen in and of itself. So I have this one. I've been using it a fair bit. It's like, I don't know if it's restored, but it's in great condition. This is a Parker 21. 21 is essentially a cheaper version of the 51. Came out a couple of years later, has some differences, which is the point of this video, but it's a very similar pen, but it's a cheaper pen. So the question is sort of, if you're in the market now and you're interested in vintage fountain pens, should you go ahead and get the Parker 51, or can you kind of settle for a 21? Is it worth the extra money for the 51 or not? And then there are many clones out there. This is the Hero 616, probably the most popular of the Chinese fountain pen clones of the Parker 51. This one is sells for like $3, so maybe $4, something like that. Should just get one of these and just forget about the originals. You know, after all, a Parker 51, this pen might be 40 plus years old. So is it worth getting something this old? Anyway, let's get right into it and get to some of the differences and do some writing with them. So this is the Parker 51, notable for different materials. It's not always gold, but there are many different ones. Hooded nib, uses a 14 karat gold nib, and just a really nice classic shape. It has a few different fill styles. Sometimes the body comes off and it has a squeeze style. It's called the aerometric. Sometimes this back piece, this blind cap, comes off and it has this plunger. It's called a vacuumatic. I wouldn't really say one is better than the other. Most people tend to prefer the aerometric, the push button style, because it's easier to work with. The vacuumatic, when it works, it's fine. But if you're gonna have a problem with a fountain pen, with a Parker 51, it's gonna be probably with the vacuumatic. Again, 14 karat gold nib, hooded so you could barely see it. The Parker 21 is really similar to the 51, which is why you might accidentally buy one online, or you might excitedly bid at a 51 and end up getting a 21. It has a couple differences, but mainly it was designed to be a cheaper version of the 51. You could see that aesthetically it looks really similar. It's if you had the two next to each other, you're probably hard pressed to tell them apart. The 51 has the gold nib. The 21 almost always has a stainless steel nib. It's a little bit pointier. Some of the hardware is a little bit different, but it's a really similar pen in a lot of ways. Generally, I found, having had multiple versions of each one, that the 21 scratches the itch for me. If I have a Parker 21 and I'm using it, I'm as happy as having a 51. Considering that a 21 might cost, on a used market, good condition, about $20, whereas a 51, you're really not gonna find in good condition for under $40. And they go up from there. Parker 51s could sell upwards of $150, $200, whereas the 21s kind of cap out like maybe $40, $50. This one, like I said, steel nib. Some of them were sold with gold nibs, but they're pretty rare. I wouldn't even consider them to be a very popular option. So don't even look for a gold nib, I would say, based on my experience. This one uses a squeeze style converter. It's kind of like the aerometric converter on the Parker 51, slightly different, but it's essentially the same thing. And these are easy to replace and do some work on if need be. Generally, they're held up pretty well. So 51 has a gold nib, 21 has a steel nib. Designs really similar. Some of the 51s have, this is called a gold filled cap. It's kind of like gold coated, but gold filled has more gold. It's like a heavy gold coating, and it has a nice weight to it. It looks kind of cool. You can see the 51s have very ornate clips, and I'm speaking in generalizations here, as not every 51 has the same clip. but they tend to have pretty ornate clips. If you look at the 21 or the Parker Super 21, which is a version of the 21, you can see it has the arrow, but the arrow is just stamped into the metal. Here, the arrow is actually kind of cut out. There's some, the arrow, the fletchlings or the feathers, I'm blanking on what you call them, are actually kind of, you could see them there. Here, it's just stamped into a piece of metal, and the arrowhead is not its own piece. So again, 51 is just a lot more ornate. The cap on the 51 is functionally different as well. There's a spring mechanism in here that makes it really go on in a really beautiful motion. Even now, again, 40 plus years later, it just goes on really well, and it could easily be pulled off. The 21 is missing that internal spring mechanism. It's called a clutch. So it just kind of friction fits onto this thing, which means it'll wear out over time, and it does not go on and off as cleanly. It's harder to pull off. It's not hard to pull off, but it's harder to pull off. And it tends to have some wobble, whereas the 51, if their clutch is working, won't have that wobble. This 21 also has some smearing of ink. It's not terrible, but it's a little bit annoying to have that ink on the lower section, where that is not really something you'd see with the 51. 51 also oftentimes has a jewel. This is this little piece of plastic at the top. Sometimes there's a double jewel, which means there's a jewel over here as well. I guess these were cool at the time. Most pens today, you're not looking for a sweet jewel anywhere on it, but you do see it now and then with like the Uniball Premier or Prime, whatever they call them. So I think we've covered kind of most of the differences: the clutch, the cap, the clip. Actually, one good one to note is that the Parker 51s are made of a higher end plastic than the 21s. 51s used, have this all in an article on unsharpened.com, but they use this really nice high end type of lucite, whereas the 21s use a cheaper plastic. So if your 21s survive this long, it's probably okay, but these are much more prone to cracking over the years relative to the 51s, which have held up incredibly nicely. This one is just really cool looking. It's gold, it's really light colored gold, and this sort of navy blue. It's just a great looking pen. This one is like some kind of drab gray. Some of the 21s are nicer, but they definitely don't have anywhere near the style of the 51. And then we'll just briefly touch on this pen. This is the Hero 616. Clearly, it's a take on the Parker 51, maybe even a clone. Kind of like the 21, but it's like with the cap and the other features, like it's probably really trying to copy the 51. It has an okay cap rather, clearly not as nice as the Parker. The arrow is clearly not as nice as the Parkers. So even 50 years or whatever later, the 616 not able to outdo what Parker did with the 51. It's more akin in quality to the 21. It has that little jewel there, but it's not plastic, it's just metal. Nothing fancy on the back, so no big deal there. It has a little sort of ink window here, which is cool. The Parkers, they didn't have an ink window. They had this little band, like a wedding band type thing. There's all sorts of different Parker-specific terminology, which you'll get into if you read up on these. The nib looks really similar to that of the 21 or 51, but it is stainless steel, it's not gold. Opening this up, you can see it has an aromatic type cartridge. An arometric type converter similar to the some of the 51s. It's fully covered like a 51. It's not open like the 21 that I have. And you just kind of squeeze this thing to fill it. There's no instructions or anything. There's just some Chinese writing there. And from a material standpoint, it looks like, to me, maybe steel, but probably more likely raw aluminum. It's pretty light. You have nice new threading here. There are some advantages, obviously, to getting a brand new pen. And the plastic feels really cheap. It doesn't feel like the nice plastic from the 51. But like plastics from yesteryear tend to be heavier and more satisfying feeling than modern plastics, just generally speaking. So quickly on the writing, this is going to vary usually based on the condition of your pen. So the 51 is a nice writing pen. The fact that my 51 writes nicely or doesn't write nicely is really has nothing to do with how the 51 writes. But these things can be restored and put back in really nice condition. And you can see they're actually, it's kind of like a muscle car. It's like there's really nothing to go wrong with it because the design is so simple. All you do is you unscrew this piece if you want to get a look at the insides. Then you could see that tiny little nib, the feed, and kind of this whole piece comes out of the feed comes out of the body. It's a really fun pen to work on if you ever want to kind of tweak a pen. Probably, I would say, the most fun pen to work on. Not that I'm super into that sort of thing, but if you want to restore one or kind of really get in there, the 51 is the pen to do it on. Okay, so this is a, see, mine tends to write kind of dry, and since I was the one that did work on it, it's my own fault, but that's just how it is. So this is the Parker 51, and I believe this is a fine. You don't always know what you're getting with these. That's kind of one of the downsides. It's not coming in a box generally or anything like that, but this pen has no kind of like flex to it. There's nothing like that. It's not much for line variation. This is, as I understand it, this is like the ball pen of its era. This is just a pen you grabbed to get work done, and it looked cool, and it wrote well, and it was reliable. But it was a luxury pen at the time, right, the 51. But it was really about having a reliable tool to get work done. This one's running a little bit dry. So that's the Parker 51. Nice writer, but the ones that are still around tend not to write nicely unless you're getting a restored version. Here's the 21. And my Parker 21, unrestored, I just got it, I cleaned it, and I filled it. It is incredibly consistent of a writer. I don't know what happened with this pen in its previous life or how it was stored or what, but this thing is super reliable, perfect writer. I have some cool Pilot Suzuki purple ink, I forget what it's called, but this thing just writes completely reliably all day long. This one is, again, I don't know if this is necessarily how all 21s are, but I've had a great experience with this one. It just writes and writes and writes, and it's really nice. Again, no flex, no line variation, nothing like that, but you uncap it, you start writing, and it just keeps going. Really ideal. The nib has a fair bit of feedback. It's not like a super smooth fountain pen. Again, this is just for note-taking and actually getting work done. This was a workhorse pen. It was for people that they wanted some of the cool features of the 51, but they didn't need a luxury pen with a 14K nib and all the other stuff. They just wanted the cool features from the 51. So 51 at the time was like one of the cooler pens of its day. Again, you didn't have a cell phone, so writing and things like that were actually pretty important. So a couple features like how it filled and how it wrote and the hooded nib and the reliability were actually fairly big deals. And now we have the 616. I haven't written this one in it. We'll see how it does. So this one has always written dry to me, even when I got it. And Hero and some of the other Chinese pen manufacturers tend to have quality control issues. So I think this one was just one of those. So this is the Hero 616. Again, it writes really dry. And this one you can't remove the front section the way you can with the 51. So I haven't done as much to tweak it. It probably just needs a little bit of flex. Just tweaking that nib a little bit to have it be a nice nib, but it's not there yet. So right now to write, you have to apply more pressure than I would like. So this is the Hero 616. I've not been blown away with this pen. I like the price tag, but considering that you can get the real deal Parker 21 for like 20 some odd bucks, I tend not to like the 616 and the other clones because you can get the 21 for just a few dollars more. The 616 I think is kind of an older design as far as the Chinese fountain pens go, so there's probably some newer Wing Sungs and maybe even Pen BBSs, probably a Wing Sung that looks like a Parker 51, but will write nicely, more nicely than this 616. This one has been really hit and miss for me. So it's the Hero 616. There it goes. So this one is, I would say it's fine. You kind of get some of the look and feel of the 51 and part of the experience, but part of the experience of these pens is not just how they look, it's also the fact that they're vintage pens from the 40s and 50s. So even if this thing is writing, you're not truly getting what you wanted. Here it goes now. I think it just needed a little bit of push. So this is the Hero 616. They actually did clone the nib pretty nicely. It feels a lot like the 21. So it's not super smooth, but it's smooth enough and definitely has some bite to it and some feedback. So again, the writing experience is similar, but you're not getting the vintage pen. Anyway, I think that really covers it. If you're getting into specifics, I have an article on unsharpened.com about the different bodies and what plastic was used and stuff like that. But here's pretty much what you need to know about the Parker 51, Parker 21, and the modern clones. Thanks for watching.